Students' Right to Their Own Language. Presentation by Victoria, Vildana, Alexa, Clarissa, and Kimberly.
Our nation's history contains numerous social movements that have demanded the equal rights for different parties. For example, there was the women's right movement that fought for women to have the same rights as men, such as the right to vote. In many ways, this is still an ongoing movement. There was also more famously the civil rights movement, where people fought for the equal rights of African Americans. Currently, there has been a push for the equality of language. The United States is known for its diverse populations, with people coming from hundreds of different cultural backgrounds. Most of these cultures have their own language. With that being said, Smitherman argues that there needs to be a shift in how people view these different languages in a way that enables everyone to participate in the way of life of the nation by ensuring continued respect for both English, the common language, and for many other languages that have contributed to our rich cultural and linguistic heritage.
Bilingual Education Act. The 1968 Bilingual Education Act began the promise of federal directed efforts to provide appropriate educational programs for children who come to school speaking a language other than English. Shannon, 1995, page 102. However, the case of Lau versus Nicholas arose 2 years later. Chinese students in the San Francisco Unified School District brought a legal action against the district demanding to have their educational rights protected under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Their main concern was that they were not receiving education instruction and that the instruction they received in English was unclear to them as English learners. This case was among many lawsuits and legal actions that have been taken over the years involving linguistic rights even while bilingual education is available. Language minority students' linguistic rights. Language minority students' rights are not being ensured by their bilingual education. This is happening because the bilingual education program delivery differs from program to program and sometimes year to year, even though it shares the same broad goals. Because the Bilingual Education Act did not dictate what the program should look like, local needs and politics are what determine the structure of these programs. The goals of local school districts are not a national policy for bilingual education, but the maintenance of mother tongues other than English.
In order to push this movement, the Students' Right to Their Own Language policy was created. It is a policy that aims to preserve student home language, dialect, and speech. Currently, English is the dominant language of the United States. However, research states that more than 30 million residents of the United States are minority language speakers, and their numbers are on the increase primarily due to immigration. This means that although English is the dominant language, a large amount of Americans speak another language, including children. Language is a huge factor when it comes to maintaining one's culture. So, with the push for these people to learn the dominant language, they're losing a piece of their culture. The goals of this policy are to provide resources to enable native and non-native speakers to achieve oral and literate competence in English, to support programs that ensure that proficiency in the mother tongue will not be lost, and also to foster the teaching of languages other than English so that native speakers of English can rediscover the language of their heritage or learn a second language. With these goals in place, it will no longer have multilingual learner students going through a language shift. It will end up being that they go through language maintenance.
Smitherman 1995 states that, in retrospect, the students' right to their own language served its historical time and paved the way for this next evolutionary stage. We're now in the period of a new paradigm shift from a provincial, more narrowly conceived focus to a broader internationalist perspective. We are being forced to address the issue of multiple linguistic voices, not only here, but in the global family. NCTE and CCCC have focused on these issues and formulated a conversation for a national language policy. This language policy would impact all levels of education in all school subjects and in all social and institutional domains.
When thinking about language shift, It is when multilanguage learners are learning the target language in a way that eventually shifts them from their home language. As mentioned earlier, language is a huge aspect of one's culture. So if the language is lost, then a piece of their culture is lost too. Language shift is what should be avoided. Language maintenance, on the other hand, allows for multilanguage learners to learn the target language while maintaining their home language. This would allow multilanguage learners to keep the language of their culture while also becoming proficient in the target language. The goal of the Students' Right policy is to ensure that students do not lose their home language. Every person has the right to speak their home language, so it's important that language programs follow the language maintenance approach.
Supporting language maintenance. There are a few enrichment models used to benefit students when learning a second language. When students are learning a second language, it is important that they do not lose their first language. The enrichment models are dual language, bilingual immersion, two-way bilingual, and one-way bilingual. Supporting language maintenance. Bilingual immersion programs use the less dominant language, which is their first language, more in the first years than English because the minority language is less supported by the broader society and academic uses of the language are less easily acquired outside of school. Thomas and Collier, 1998. As students move up to a new grade each year, the program provides more instruction in the majority language, being English, their second language, all the way through grades 4 and 5. Once students are in grade 6, most of the time students have developed academic proficiency in both language, and students can then work in any subjects in either language at or above their grade level. Dual language programs help native and non-native speakers of English speak two languages proficiently. Two-way bilingualism is when two language groups acquire the curriculum through each other's languages, and one-way bilingualism is when one language group receives schooling through two languages.
A better future. By 2030, language minority students are predicted to account for about 40% of the school-age population. To close the equity gap, we must provide quality schooling for all learners. Bilingual education classes appear to be the most convenient for both native English speakers as well as language minority students. They provide students with a similar intellectual challenge as the gifted and talented class. Students in bilingual classes develop multiple ways to problem solve and acquire deep academic proficiency in two languages, a valuable resource. Students also learn to value the knowledge and life experiences they each bring to the classroom.
According to Kinloch 2005, in advocating for students' right to their own language, teachers must encourage student participation in selecting course readings on language and class issues. When you allow students to choose their own readings, they become more engaged with the text and the language. Students begin to make connections and confront issues of language abuse in the classroom. Students then search for a deeper meaning in the text and begin to discuss these issues with their peers, families, friends, and members of their community. We are reading, talking, discussing, sharing, and writing about these issues, circulating around language rights, but more important, we are confronting our own sense of reality, which often gets ignored in classrooms.
Discussion question. According to Kinloch 2005, all we can do is provide students with the exposure to an alternate form and allow them the opportunity to practice that form in contexts that are non-threatening, have a real purpose, and are intrinsically enjoyable. Encouraging students to use alternate forms of expression in the classroom can demonstrate the richness of languages in communication, engagement, participation, and understanding in literacy learning. How can teachers encourage students who are often reluctant to engage in discussions for fear that linguistic incompetence in standard English would measure their success or failure? Provide at least 2 specific ideas with relevant citations to support your suggestions.